It starts with a sound on the roof. Rain. Not a passing shower. A steady, relentless drum that doesn't stop by morning. You check your phone. 5 more days of this. You sigh, pull a blanket over your legs, and open an app you've already opened 4 times today. You feel restless, bored, a little strange in your own skin. You assume this feeling is new, a modern glitch caused by too much comfort and not enough to do. But the real answer is far stranger. That itch you feel when the sky won't clear is not a malfunction. It is a very old machine, still running exactly as it was built. Your brain did not evolve for sunny days. It evolved for weeks like this one. Picture a group of early humans tens of thousands of years ago, tucked into a rock shelter somewhere in what is now southern France. Outside, the rain has not stopped for 6 days. The hunting grounds are flooded. The firewood is damp. The children are restless, and so are the adults. There is no scrolling. There is no light switch. There is only the sound of water, the smell of wet stone, and each other. What did they do? For a long time, archaeologists assumed the answer was simple. They waited. They huddled. They survived. Rain was an obstacle to be endured, not a subject worth studying. But that assumption has quietly fallen apart over the last few decades as researchers started asking a different question. Not how did they survive the rain, but what did the rain make them do that sunny days never could? And the answer changes how you should think about every bored, rainy afternoon you've ever had. Start with the caves. Some of the most famous prehistoric art in the world is found deep inside caves in France and Spain, places like Chauvet and Lascaux. For years, the assumption was that this art was created during brief visits, quick trips lit by torchlight in and out. But closer study of pigment layering, tool marks, and the sheer density of imagery in certain chambers suggests something different. Many of these sites show signs of repeated, extended occupation, exactly the kind of occupation you'd expect during long stretches of bad weather, when moving camp wasn't an option and staying inside was the only choice. Paleoanthropologist Genevieve von Petzinger has spent years cataloging something most people overlook entirely. Not the animals painted on cave walls, but the geometric signs beside them. Thus, lines, grids, hand stencils, signs that repeat across caves separated by hundreds of miles and thousands of years. Her research suggests these were not random doodles. They may have been an early symbolic system, a shared visual language passed down and refined over generations. And where do you refine a language? Not on a hunt. Not while running from a predator. You refine it in the stillness. In the hours with nothing else to do. In the rain. Here is the twist that changes everything. Boredom, the very feeling you're trying to escape right now with your phone, might be one of the most important tools your ancestors ever had. Think about what boredom actually does to a mind. It doesn't just sit there. It pushes you to seek something. Anything. A distraction, a project, a conversation, a story. Psychologists studying boredom today describe it as a kind of internal alarm, a signal that your current situation isn't giving your brain enough stimulation and that you need to go find some. For most of human history, going to find some didn't mean opening an app. It meant turning to the person next to you. It meant picking up a stick and scratching a pattern into the dirt. It meant humming, then singing, then telling a story you'd heard 100 times before, but changing one detail just to see if anyone noticed. That restlessness wasn't a bug in the system. It was the engine that built culture. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years living among the Jew/Hoansi people of the Kalahari, studying how their conversations changed depending on the time of day. During daylight hours, when there was work to do, conversation was practical. Gossip, complaints, logistics, who owed what to whom. But after dark, when the group was forced together around the fire with nothing left to do, the conversation transformed. Stories emerged. Tales about distant relatives, ancestors, spirits, the origins of the world. Wiesner found that these nighttime stories were dramatically more likely to build empathy, imagination, and a shared sense of identity across the group than the daytime talk ever was. Now stretch that same principle across a week of rain instead of a single night. If one dark evening around the fire was enough to shift a group from practical chatter into shared mythology, imagine what 6 straight days trapped together, unable to hunt, unable to gather, unable to do anything but wait, could produce. Not just stories. Traditions. Rituals. The earliest versions of what you might recognize today as religion, art, and law, all quietly assembled during the hours when the world outside was simply unavailable. There's a reason this matters so much for something as fragile as a hunter-gatherer band. These groups were small, often no more than 30 or 40 people, and their survival depended entirely on cooperation. You couldn't outrun a lion alone. You couldn't raise a child alone. You needed the group to function as a single, trusting unit, and trust is not built by working side by side in silence. It's built by knowing someone's stories, their fears, their jokes, their family history. Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar has spent decades studying exactly how humans maintain social bonds in groups larger than almost any other primate can manage. His research points to something surprising. Grooming, the physical, one-on-one bonding behavior other primates rely on, doesn't scale. You simply don't have enough hours in the day to physically groom 40 different people the way a chimpanzee grooms its troop. Language, Dunbar argues, evolved partly as a replacement, a way to bond with many people at once through shared laughter, shared gossip, shared story, rather than one grooming session at a time. And what forces an entire group of 30 to 40 people into one place at one time with nothing to do but talk? Rain does. Cold does. Any stretch of bad weather that shuts down the day's usual work does exactly that. It doesn't just interrupt survival. It creates the conditions for social bonding on a scale that a normal working day never allows. So picture that shelter again. 6 days of rain. But now look closer. In one corner, someone is teaching a child how to notch a piece of bone, correcting their grip, showing them again when they get it wrong. In another, 2 people are arguing gently about whether the story about the drowned hunter really happened that way, or whether it's been exaggerated with each telling. Someone else is scratching a pattern into a wall, the same shape they saw an elder make years ago, adding a small variation of their own. A baby is crying, and 3 different adults take turns soothing it, not because they have to, but because there is genuinely nothing else pressing to do. This is not a group waiting out a storm. This is a group being built, session by rainy session, into something more cohesive than they were the week before. Consider what was actually at stake in that shelter. A hunter-gatherer band wasn't just a collection of individuals who happened to sleep near each other. It was a survival system, and every member was a working part of it. If trust broke down between 2 families over a dispute about food, the whole group weakened. If children grew up without hearing the stories that explained which plants were poisonous, which animals were dangerous, which neighboring groups could be trusted and which couldn't, that knowledge simply vanished. There was no book to fall back on. No archive. The only place that information lived was inside people, and the only way it moved from one person to the next was through hours of shared attention, exactly the kind of attention that a normal, busy day rarely allowed. Rain, in that sense, functioned almost like a forced classroom. Nobody chose to gather everyone together for 6 days of storytelling and tool-making. The weather chose it for them. And because nobody could opt out, wander off, or claim they were too busy, the knowledge transfer that happened during those stretches was unusually complete. Elders who might normally be occupied with separate tasks were suddenly available all day. Children who might normally be sent off with other children were suddenly underfoot, listening in on adult conversations they wouldn't normally hear. Skills that took weeks to teach in scattered 5-minute lessons could be taught in a single sitting. There's a reason this pattern shows up again and again when researchers study surviving hunter-gatherer societies in the modern era. Groups living in regions with a sharp wet season and dry season often show a striking difference in behavior between the two. During the dry season, when travel and hunting are easy, social gatherings are shorter, more scattered, more practical. During the wet season, when movement slows and people are pushed into closer, longer contact, ceremonies grow more elaborate, storytelling sessions grow longer, and young people receive far more direct instruction from elders. The weather isn't incidental to the culture. In many of these societies, it is one of the forces that shapes the culture's calendar. Now think about what that means for something you might never have connected to rain at all: music. Rhythmic tapping, humming, simple percussion made by striking sticks or stones together. These are some of the oldest human behaviors researchers can trace, far older than complex language itself. And they require almost nothing except time and company. You don't need daylight to make music. You don't need dry ground. You don't even need much skill at first, only a willingness to keep going until a pattern starts to feel right. A rain-bound shelter, dim and crowded and short on other options, is close to an ideal environment for exactly that kind of experimentation. Tap a rhythm. Someone else joins in. Someone starts humming along. An hour later, without anyone deciding to invent anything, a song exists that didn't exist that morning. Here's where it gets even stranger. Some researchers studying seasonal patterns in prehistoric sites have noted that certain regions show spikes in symbolic and artistic activity that line up with periods of reduced mobility, the times of year when travel and hunting were hardest, whether from rain, snow, or flooding. In other words, art didn't happen despite the bad weather. In many cases, it happened because of it. The very thing that shut down the productive parts of daily life opened up space for the parts of human culture that don't show up in a hunting tally, but that hold a society together for generations. Compare that to how you experience a rainy week today. The restlessness hits, and within seconds you have a device in your hand promising instant relief. A video, a feed, a game. The itch gets scratched immediately, quietly, alone, without ever forcing you toward another human being or toward creating anything yourself. Your ancestors didn't have that option. Their boredom had nowhere to go except outward, toward each other, or into their own hands. And so their boredom built cave paintings that still exist 40,000 years later. Yours builds a slightly higher screen time number on a weekly report you'll forget by Monday. There's also the matter of the hands. A rainy week didn't just produce stories and songs. It produced objects. Careful ones. When you are stuck inside with nothing pressing to finish, you don't just make a tool that works. You make a tool that works and also happens to look right in your hand. Archaeologists studying stone and bone tools from long occupation sites have noted something telling. The most heavily decorated, most finely finished objects, the ones with deliberate patterns etched into handles, the ones polished far beyond what function alone would require, tend to cluster at sites showing signs of extended, weather-bound habitation. A tool made in 10 rushed minutes between tasks looks different from a tool made across 3 unhurried days. The second one has room in it for care, and even for kind of pride, that the first one simply doesn't allow. Psychologists studying boredom in laboratory settings today have found something that lines up almost perfectly with this. When people are given a genuinely boring task with no other stimulation available, their minds don't go blank. They start generating ideas, daydreaming, planning, even inventing small games out of nothing, a kind of unconscious search for meaning in a gap. Take away the easy escape hatch, the phone, the television, the endless feed, and that searching mind has to land somewhere. In a modern laboratory, it usually lands on daydreaming. In a rain-soaked shelter 40,000 years ago, with other restless minds sitting right beside you, it landed on shared invention instead. Not because your ancestors were somehow more disciplined or more creative than you. Because they had no alternative except each other, and out of that narrow set of options came an entire toolkit for building meaning together. That's not a judgment. It's a mismatch. Your brain still generates the same restless signal your ancestors felt in that shelter. Rainy day, nothing to do, a low hum of unease that says find something. Only now, the easiest thing to find requires no other person, no story told out loud, no shared attention at all. The signal still fires exactly the way it did 50,000 years ago. What you do with it is the only thing that's changed. There's something worth sitting with in that. The next time a storm rolls in and stretches past a single evening, past 2 evenings, into a genuine stretch of days where your usual plans collapse, notice what your mind reaches for first. Notice the itch to fill the silence instantly, alone, with something that asks nothing of you. And then notice what happens if you resist that reach for even one evening. If you talk instead. If you make something with your hands, however clumsy. If you tell a story you've told before and let someone add a detail you didn't expect. You are not fighting boredom in that moment. You're doing exactly what a small group in a rain-soaked shelter did tens of thousands of years ago, using the one resource that bad weather always hands you for free, each other, and the uninterrupted time to actually pay attention. It's worth asking why this signal never faded, even after tens of thousands of years, even after shelters became houses and fires became furnaces. Evolution is stingy. It doesn't keep a behavior running for that long unless it kept paying off generation after generation. A band that turned its rainy weeks into stronger bonds, better taught children, and more finely made tools had a real advantage over a band that simply sat in silence and waited for the sky to clear. That advantage compounded. Over enough generations, the restlessness itself became a feature, wired in deep enough that it still shows up in you today, Even though you've never had a hand teach a child how to notch bone, even though you've never needed a fireside story to remember which berries were safe to eat. The circumstances change completely. The wiring didn't. None of this means rain was pleasant back then. It wasn't. Damp firewood, flooded ground, hungry children, the very real danger of illness setting in when everyone was packed together in a cold, wet space for days on end. This is not a story about rain being some secret gift. It's a story about what your ancestors did with a genuinely difficult situation and how that response, forced stillness turned into forced connection, left a mark so deep it's still sitting in your nervous system today, waiting for a rainy week to wake it back up. So the next time the forecast shows 5 straight days of rain, and you feel that low, familiar restlessness settle in, remember what it actually is. Not a modern inconvenience. Not a flaw in your attention span. It's the same signal that once filled a limestone shelter in Ice Age France with stories, songs, and the careful scratch of a hand tracing a shape onto stone over and over until it meant something to everyone who saw it. The rain hasn't stopped. It rarely does, not for you and not for them. But what you build in the waiting, that's the part that was always the point.